If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
This is more learning about people than it is learning about games design. But it's that people don't give kids enough credit.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, I've got a, 9 or 10-year-old kid, and what games are good for 10-year-olds?" I'm like, the answer is all games are good for 10-year-olds. Like, my kids can, like, by 10, they were like playing Star Wars Rebellion on their own. You know, like, and I know. That's not me like boasting about my kids being smart or anything. It's just they got gaming early. They get it. They're inspired by it. They're excited by it. They're competitive. And they can play any game.
I finally got a chance to talk to someone involved with the adored RPG SLA Industries. And I learned why SLA Industries fans are so passionate. We learn about Shep's work as a younger man at Games Workshop and its influence on him becoming a creator. Make sure to listen for his view on kids and their capabilities as gamers. We talk D&D, and you'll want to hear his feelings about the game. The reasons why he loves sci-fi but isn't a big fantasy fan is interesting. And lastly, we talk about his new solo RPG, Rectify, which is provocative and unique to say the least. Now, the sole reason I can spend hours to bring you interviews like this is because of the support I get from my patrons on Patreon. So big thanks goes out to the most recent patrons and floorheads. Thank you, Harmony Bat, Troy Banks, Kevin Greenlee, Michael S. Miller, Jay Fabo3, and Jake from Faded Quill Gaming. All right, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Shep.
This is Sean.
And this is Navi.
And together we're a couple of Drakes, the creators of Court of Blades and Jedville.
When we're not writing games, we're listening to Tabletop Talk. Toppy Talk Talk?
You want to try that again?
When we're not writing games, we're listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today I sit down with Chris Shepperson. Shep is a game designer, writer, and publisher from Derby, UK. Alongside a day job as a brand manager with Modifius Entertainment, Shep also owns and runs Hanser Publishing, an outlet for his own passion projects and creations, most notably the Gaia Complex and the upcoming solo horror RPG, Rectify. So Shep, welcome to the third floor.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on. It's great to be here, and I'm very excited to chat about some bits and pieces.
Yeah, it was a no-brainer for me. I've had my left eye on Gaia for a while, and Anthony Boyd is a mutual for us. And as soon as Anthony says, "Hey, Craig, you need to talk to Shep," I was like, "Yep, no-brainer. Let me find him. Let's get him on here." All right. I know that you have done this a million times on podcasts, but I'm going to ask you to do it one more time for me, which is I need you to take you back in time. So there was a time, Shep, you knew nothing about board games. You knew nothing about role-playing games. And then suddenly someone put a sheet of paper in front of you and a pencil and a couple dice, and you played your first RPG. Can we go back to that moment?
So my introduction to gaming beyond the traditional family board games, actually RPGs came second, although they followed quite quickly after Warhammer. So it all started with wargaming. I'm from Nottingham originally in the UK, which is the home of Games Workshop.
Yeah.
And if you were a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s and you either played Warhammer or you despised people that played Warhammer, right? Like that was the two sides of the coin. And so I played Warhammer. So I discovered that through a friend's older brother. So we were probably, I don't know, like the first year of secondary school over here. And I don't know how old, I'd have been like 11 or 12 years old. And a friend's older brother who was maybe like 15, 16. I know we'd go around, just kind of play on a Sega Master System or whatever it might have been back then. And he'd have been sat there, painting these miniatures. And I was like engrossed. And then eventually my friend, his brother forced him into playing Warhammer with him, and eventually I started playing and I was hooked, like at 12, 13 years old. Like that just became my life. And then probably, I don't know, maybe a year later, and we'd like slowly infecting other people at school to get them to come and play with us as well. And eventually a friend of mine was like, oh, my older brother, who's like, I don't know, 18 now or something, he started role playing. And we were like, what the hell is that? So he's like, just come round and we can have a look at some of his books. And he had first edition Shadowrun
Nice
core book. So I remember going through it and finding the art awesome. And then we tried to play it, and like the rules and like it was a bit. You played first edition Shadowrun, like it was like not very accessible to a younger gamer's mind at that point in time. But then we kind of like we were really keen on the idea, and it ended up that back then in the UK there was the RPGA, the Role Play Game Association, and they had a club in Nottingham that met every other Sunday for like 4 hours. And we just like went along as a group. Like I think they thought we were just some like gang of youths come to raid the place. And we were like, there was like 3 tables in an old scouts hut. And there we were like, we know people that role play. We've seen like Shadowrun, and we didn't really like it. Like, what else is there? And they were like, oh well, these people here are playing Vampire, and those people over there are playing Cyberpunk 2020, and those people over there are playing Slay Industries. So we were like, okay, can we try all of them in the same day? And like, it doesn't really work like that. But so we and then the rest is history, really. We started going regularly, and we slowly rotated. Like we just kind of played and got our characters killed really quick, so we could move on to the next game and try that out. And yeah, for many years through my teenage years, like that was it. Wargaming and role playing was just like what we did in the evenings and the weekends, and summer holidays came and we would like, someone would work out a campaign and we'd just like hang out at somebody's house and play for like 7 days straight. It's like the glory days of role playing. And I remember like that was back when like Cyberpunk 2020 was churning out like, like 3 books a month.
Yeah.
And it was just so much content, but and it was all the black and white art era, and it was great. Like, it was really fun. And we discovered, what else have we got? In Nomine, Conspiracy X, and then we moved on to, from Vampire to Werewolf and Changeling and Wraith and Mage. And then I distinctly remember about 2 years later, it was at that RPGA club that one guy was like, have you guys ever tried live action role playing?
Oh, interesting.
Oh, really? And he goes, yeah, like we're playing Vampire now. And he goes, we meet at this pub in town. He's like, I know, like, you're not really old enough to be in there, but I'm sure we can. People, it was a bit more relaxed back then, right? In the 90s. There was a place called, the Imperial. And it was supposed to be a Russian bar. And they sold, like, beer came in 2-pint glasses, and like they just had vodka or beer, like that was the choices. And we went down there and we started Vampire live action role playing, and we didn't really get it, but we were really excited to be with a group of people that helped us sneak into a pub. So we were like, we used to go for the drink, like somebody would be like, yeah, we'll get you a beer. Brilliant. We were like, I don't know, like 16. Sure. Maybe at the time. And so I guess we were fairly mature for 16-year-olds. But I'm only 5'4" now, so how I got away with it back then, I have no idea. You still get carded. I still get carded now, yeah. And it was that was it really. And I think I lived and breathed the hobby for all through my teenage years, and I eventually, in my early 20s, I was like 2021, got a job at Games Workshop. Nice. Head office. I worked for Forge World, at the time, and I worked there for a couple of years. And I went to games days around the world for them in the glory days, just about when they launched Lord of the Rings and the movies were out, and that was like huge. And then when Lord of the Rings wasn't huge and exciting anymore, and the shareholders decided to tell us that we couldn't fly me around the world with a million other people, I kind of decided to move on a little bit. And actually still to this day remains one of my biggest regrets, because it was a pretty cool place to work back then. And I still got a lot of friends that work there now. And I've remained a casual gamer all the way through my adult years, the occasional games night with friends, and we'd meet up and play Axis and Allies or the odd game of Warhammer. I played in the Blood Bowl League for many years, and I dabbled. Obviously, adult life took over a little bit until maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, when I was getting all excited again and dabbling with designing my own games, and my now wife was just like, can you please just like run a Kickstarter or do something with them before they just like, you spend months and it's on just do something with it. And that's when I really started working in the industry again and built up to where I am now. So,
that's exciting. So I've got a ton of questions. Let's start going back to the very beginnings here when, you're sitting there, you're playing video games. You've got your buddy's brother painting miniatures, and you end up getting sucked into there. As an adult looking back, do you have a sense of why, Shep, that just, of all the things you were exposed to as a kid, right? Somehow pushing little dolls around on the table, and I'm one of them. I love miniature gaming. What was it that happened then when you look back on it? What was it that just ignited you?
I mean, it's pretty hard to pinpoint, but I think it's probably the same thing that I got from video gaming for a while, and that I also get from watching like a really good movie, and that is the escape from reality. Like, it's something that's just so impossible to do for myself in real. Like, I can't run around a 41st millennia battlefield with a rocket launcher on my shoulder. That's never going to happen. But like the miniatures are exciting, and I'm actually a pretty good miniatures painter. I'm slow, but I'm pretty good. But I've always been a player first and a hobbyist second. Yeah. Like, I know a lot of people, they live and breathe for they love the building and I like to play games. Like, I go through bursts where I want to pick up the paintbrush a lot. But for the general thing at the time, I was all about just playing games, having fun. Like, and I think back then, like, maybe I just kind of wanted to feel like a kid for a bit longer, like growing up a bit too fast. And it was like, man, I can play these games and adults want to play them as well. Like, that must be cool. Like, people that are older than me,
right?
Like my friends' older brothers, they're like doing this and they seem like cool people. So maybe this is like the next step. Like, video games are like one thing, and then the wargaming is like the cool thing. Yeah. So, I don't know if I was following a trend or if I was just kind of a bit of, just stepping into the footsteps of my peers or what it was, but there was something about it that was exciting. It captured my imagination, and and I just felt like very shortly after we started playing Warhammer, and we'd go to the local Games Workshop store, which was on Friar Lane in Nottingham, and shortly after we started doing that, like, I felt like I was part of a community.
Yeah.
Like, I was like a 14-year-old kid who could go into a store in a city center and the store manager would like acknowledge me by name. And like if I go to a Games Workshop store now, like, it does my head in. They're like, hey, what are you painting? What are you building? And
what are you working on?
Let me buy some minis and leave, please. But back then, like, I understand why they do it, because they had such an impact on me as a child, as an early teen, being like, these people are so interested in me. They're so kind, and this hobby is awesome. And like that was really what did it for me. Like, people being older than me, being excited about what it was. Like, it was a brilliant feeling.
What's funny about that, Shep, is that I don't feel like enough people acknowledge that aspect of it. People talk about, I love the strategy of it, or I like the hobby, the building and putting together the perfect list. I suspect that there's a lot of people like you, because I was one of them. One of the things that drew me to wargaming and eventually RPGs, or returning to RPGs, is the community, right? And that feeling that you're a part of something. And I think about it, especially at the age because I was much older, but at the age you were in, that had to have been huge just to acknowledge it.
Yeah, it was. And, it really helped me. And I think many children come out of themselves when they go to a event or a games night and they play with strangers. They are engaging with other people with a like-minded hobby. That can be huge. I mean, I've got two boys myself now who are 11 and 13, and I have forced gaming down their throats since they were old enough to walk. And that, I took them. We go to a monthly Netrunner gaming event. Right? I got them playing Netrunner when they were like 8 and 9, and the youngest, I think he was 9 or 10 at the time, he won a playmat, and if any, he came like top 3. People were like, how do kids understand this game? And I'm like, people don't give kids enough credit. But also, you've come along and he sat at tables through the course of the evening with 30-year-olds who have spoke to him on a mature level,
right,
and given him an opportunity to show that he's got something to say. He's got something to say. He's not just a kid. And that's so empowering to see that happening, that, I can see that happening to me. That's exactly what happened to me going into Games Workshop stores in the 90s. So yeah, absolutely. Community is everything.
So I've got a similar origin story. I think I played role-playing games, but the first time I got just elbow deep in a hobby was definitely wargaming. And it was similar to you seeing, for me, it was college, but I'm seeing, people playing war games. So we share that, right? And I get into RPGs. I love running games. I love exposing my daughter to this stuff and her getting into it. My wife has no interest, which is fine. But here's what's different between you and I, is that somewhere, somehow, you got it in your head that I want to do more than just create a campaign for my table. I want to do more than just GM for my table. I want to start making something for a bigger consumption, something outside of it. Do you have a sense of when that instinct stepped in, right? At what point did you say, I want to make something?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that was probably when I was employed by Games Workshop. I think in my teenage years, role-playing started that process for me.
Okay.
Like that whole concept of writing the campaign. Like I'm a player, and even today, I'm somebody that doesn't really buy campaign books for RPGs. I love source material. I want the hardware catalog. I want the guide to the wilderness. I want the information, and I don't want your pre-written adventures. Like I'm not that interested, because like I can talk a lot and I can spin a story, and I like doing that. So role-playing made me realize that I kind of wanted to be a storyteller of some capacity. I don't know if I'd ever decided I'd have the dedication to like write a novel, but I knew that I wanted to make more, and I would always create new house rules. Like I would always be like, okay, there's rules for everything here in Cyberpunk 2020, but that aren't rules for parachuting. Okay, or at least not in the books I had. We're going to do something. I'm going to make something new. And then everyone would be like, where'd you get the rules for that? And I'd be like, I made them. And they'll be like, brilliant. So that was always a thing. Like it was always a thing. I always needed to push the boundaries, push the limits of the games I was playing. When I worked for Games Workshop, I worked for Forge World in particular, I was really in the sales office. So Forge World was across the road from Games Workshop head office in its own little building. Back then it was on a little retail park called Easter Park. You could see the Games Workshop building across the road, but you had to like run across the road in the pouring rain at lunchtime to use the canteen and stuff. And we had like a sales office upstairs, and I used to take the sales calls and the like. And I also used to be responsible for finding people to paint all our models, because the heavy metal team were generally too busy painting the main stuff. And downstairs, right underneath us, we had the little development studio, and there's some great guys down there. Half of them still work for Games Workshop. And it was just this little cramped room that had like 4 sculptors and 2 rules writers and the studio manager, like this tiniest room you can imagine. And they were all just biddling away. And you'd have to go up and downstairs, ask questions, and you'd go in. And every time you go in, it was Warwick Kincaid, I think his name was at the time. He was the Imperial Armor rules writer for the Forge World books, and you could just be like, I'd just be like, this guy's sitting there all day making rules for tanks. This is the best job ever. I have to find a way to get here.
Right.
I have to know how do I do this? And actually, I started. We would just I would just go home and I would just convert tanks. I was a big miniatures converter back then, and I'd be like, "This is a new thing now. I'm gonna have to write the rules." And eventually, we'd be literally like me and my friends. We'd be playing games where like we'd just have entire army lists that we just made all the miniatures up for and made all the lists up for, and I got into rules writing, and when that happened, something switched in me, and I was very focused on like, well, we've just tried out our new units, but they're not balanced.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was something in me that was like more than just needing to make something. It was like, now it has to really work. That we have to go back to the drawing board and tweak this. And a lot of my friends were just like we're not that interested in doing that shit. We just like want to make something cool, and like it doesn't matter if it's overpowered. And I'm like, no, it matters to me because one day it might be in a book. Like there are guys at work, they already put them in the book. Everything starts in someone's brain. And this could be so. I went down that rabbit hole then of just needing to create. When I left Games Workshop and I went on to do other things or the jobs over the years that were outside of the gaming industry, I never stopped tweaking with games designs. And as the industry sort of swung over the last 15, 20 years, and the board gaming industry kind of grew. And I kind of started playing a lot more board games. Everybody picked up Catan and then Ticket to Ride and Pandemic. And as things progressed, the collection of board games you can see behind me in this pile is, that happened. And I never stopped tweaking until the point where I had a family, really. And my kids were like, we started them off on like the Orchard, like the kids' games, and they were like 3 and 4, Past the Pigs, and like matching pairs and basic stuff. But by the time they were like, I don't know, like 6, 7, we would sit at the table and they'd be like, right, we'll play Catan. You're on my team and you're on Mum's team. And
nice.
By the time they were like 8, they would just get up and play Pandemic on their own on a Saturday morning. Like people don't give kids enough credit. But at that point, I'm like, okay, these are like play testers in my house, right? So I started
child labor.
Yeah, that's exactly what. Just be careful how we phrase it. But I started pulling, games designs that I just had floating around, ideas for things for ages, and I'd be like, guys, do you want to play a new game? And they would be like, yeah, because we want to play games every day. And I'm like, brilliant, you've not seen this one before, and I know it looks crap because it's just drawn on a piece of paper with a pencil, but it's a game, let's play it. And I started doing stuff, and they'd be like, if they were bored in 20 minutes, I'd be like, that can go back on the shelf.
Yeah.
But then if they played it through to completion for an hour, you can capture an 8-year-old's attention for an hour without them bouncing around the room or drawing on the wall. Then you're like, okay, this is cool. And then, I kept doing that. And until eventually my wife was like, look, Shep, the Kickstarter exists. Just do it. Right. And she was right. I did it,
Yeah.
I put a little game out, and that was really the start of me being like, okay, I need to get back into working in a games company again. And then it spiraled from there. And I, despite doing many jobs in the industry over the last few years, particularly, that are not creative roles within the games industry, they're more business orientated roles, I still think of myself as a games designer and a writer first. I am still a creator, and if I was given the time, I would just create nonstop.
Yeah. So Interesting. If we go back, if you think back to your little incubator that you had with you and the kids, where you started slapping down rough designs, hey, kids, you want to play a new game, and you got feedback from them, you learned some things in that process, and it sounds like it may have been really kind of the genesis of all of this. Is there anything that you learned in that time when it was just you, your wife, and your kids, and you were putting your creations in front of them? Is there anything you learned that you still leverage today?
One thing, I think I've touched on this very briefly, and it's a conversation I have a lot. I see it happen on social network groups, like on Facebook, on discussion groups, is, this is more learning about people than it is learning about games design, but it's that people don't give kids enough credit.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, I've got a 9 or 10-year-old kid, and what games are good for 10-year-olds?" I'm like, the answer is all games are good for 10-year-olds. Like, my kids can, like, by 10, they were like playing Star Wars Rebellion on their own, you know, like, and I know that's not me like boasting about my kids being smart or anything. It's just they got gaming early. They get it. They're inspired by it. They're excited by it. They're competitive, and they can play any game that you show them, how to play. And I believe any child can, if they start playing games and they like it. And if you introduce a kid to games and they're like, yeah, whatever, they're not going to get to that point. But if it excites them, like, the sky is the limit. And sure, okay, it's a little different if your kid's 10 and they've never really played anything beyond Monopoly before, and you've got to start over. And there are obviously good gateway game suggestions you can throw in there. But the onus there is not what's a good game for somebody that's new to gaming. It's like, my kid's only 9. What are they capable of? And like, I learned so much, not just playing games with my kids, but using them as play testers.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I don't give these guys enough credit. Like, they are little people and they are very capable. So that was a really huge lesson for me, and it changed the way I looked at my children as a parent, and how I look at other kids who are doing great things and don't always get enough credit for it. I think that's a really important thing to touch on.
So, Shep, I've interviewed now hundreds of creators, and one thing that's very unique about your origin story is at no point did I hear the Dungeons and Dragons mentioned. Your first initial exposure were to some really, not uncommon games, but smaller games. Right now, obviously, Vampire was huge, but thinking about like Slay Industries and things like that. As you create now, and you again look back at those formative exposure to some of those non-dragon role-playing games, are there any games or systems that you feel really had a huge impact in how you think about role-playing games?
Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons is an interesting one because I've never been a fan of Dungeons and Dragons.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think I mean, at that point, I can't even think what edition it would have been at that point. But I didn't like the system. Okay, I've always been somebody, like, I'm a rules guy. I've worked as a developer on a lot of rule systems. Like, good rule systems make me tick. Like, it's a good thing. And I always disliked Dungeons and Dragons. And today, 5th Ed is everywhere. 5th Ed is really an important part of our gaming community. It's a lot of people's introduction. I can't stand it. Like, I'm not a fan. Like, it has its place, and I also wouldn't say that I would personally never make a 5th Ed based supplement, because from a commercial standpoint, like running a business, sometimes that is the right decision about certain game supplements, right? But as a creator and as a lover of games and of rules, like, I think Dungeons and Dragons has always had too much to remember, and it's always had too many moving parts, and it also tried to introduce too many rules for too many things. And I still feel that way about about Fifth Ed, and I do like very, very streamlined, narrative focused rule systems, but I do also like older school crunchy stuff. You know, like I grew up on first edition Slay Industries, and that was very crunchy, and there's just something about it worked, and something about Dungeons and Dragons didn't. Also, as a flip to that, I've never been a huge fantasy fan. Like,
okay, that's interesting. Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, like, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, okay?
Right.
And I'm a big fan of the One Ring, the first edition One Ring, when Johnny Hodgson was the man behind the art, and like that. I really loved those books. They felt very Tolkien, and I love the Tolkien novels. But outside of Lord of the Rings, not a lot of fantasy has ever really made me like excited until recent years, like things like The Witcher. And I have to admit, like, I discovered The Witcher through Netflix, not through the novels. Okay,
right.
like I've gone backwards and I've read the fiction and stuff, and it's great. But I started, like Henry Cavill is the reason I like The Witcher, not because I discovered it through being a fantasy lover. And if I look like now at my RPG collection, which is sizable, there are really only two notable fantasy lines in there. One is the One Ring, and the other is Modiphius's Conan 2D20. And the reason that I have so much of that, if I'm honest, is because I used to be the line manager for it. And so I love the world because I was utterly engrossed in it for a few years. Like, it was my life. And so it holds a very special place for me. But I could probably be honest and say if I hadn't worked with Conan as the line manager, would I have ever got into it the way I did? Maybe not. Like, there's some great writing in there. We worked with some fantastic writers, and that made it very special. But I don't know what it is. Like, I've always been a sci-fi fan, and it's the same deal with movies. I think back, I grew up, I think about the first more mature movies I saw when the first 18 rated films I saw before I was 18, and were RoboCop, Terminator, Predator. Like, these things excited me. They were new worlds. They were that escape from reality. There was just something about it. Like, and I remember watching fantasy of the time, like Willow and man, I can't even think. But those, and I enjoyed those movies, but I was never a fan like I have been of science fiction.
So a lot of the things that you just listed as reasons you love sci-fi, I could hear a fantasy fan say, that's why I love fantasy, right? So in your mind, what is the differentiator? So what does sci-fi bring that excites you that fantasy doesn't bring as a genre?
I honestly don't know if I can answer that question. Something inside me, I feel this magnetic pull to things with exploration and cybernetics and just the use of artificial intelligence, and there's something about that side of creative media that makes my ears prick up. And then there's something about adventurers walking off into the wilderness with a bow and a sword that makes me feel like, but it's not Lord of the Rings, is it? Like, that might seem really harsh, and it might even be quite naive, because there's obviously loads of great fantasy out there. Like, I watch sci-fi and I don't immediately say, how does this stand up to RoboCop? But I do watch fantasy and I think, how does this stack up to Lord of the Rings? And the answer is really almost always nothing. Nothing is as good as those movies or those books. Like, I just can't get past that. And, I'm happy to admit that it just doesn't work for me. And so
it sounds like that there is a touchstone that scratches that itch for you, right? And you just don't have a desire to explore beyond that. Whereas with sci-fi, it sounds like your appetite is a little bit wider, and that there's just something that's a little bit different about it. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators to learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. We've got a lot to talk about in that way with Shep, so we'll be right back. Are you enjoying our long-form interviews with creatives on this podcast? Maybe you're craving deeper discussions about our guests or some of the RPG plays on our Twitch and YouTube channel. Well, I've got an opportunity for you. You see, Third Floor Wars now has a Patreon-only Discord server. You can join a vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts diving deep into every episode of our RPG plays and podcast. Connect with fans, engage in spirited discussions, and unlock the behind-the-scenes insights. For just $1 a month, access a world of tabletop gaming goodness. Connect with passionate gamers who share your love for the Tabletop Podcast and everything produced on the third floor. As a Patreon supporter, you also enjoy ad-free episodes of this podcast. You can immerse yourselves in captivating stories and fascinating interviews without interruptions, taking your listening experience to a whole new level. By joining the Third Floor Wars Patreon community, you not only gain exclusive access to the Patreon-only Discord server, but you also support the growth of my podcast and channels. Your contributions enable me to continue creating high-quality content that entertains, educates, and upskills tabletop enthusiasts like yourself. Maybe don't wait. Join the Third Floor Wars Patreon today and unlock a world of camaraderie, discussions, and knowledge. Visit patreon.com/Third Floor Wars or check the link in the show notes and come join our community. The Third Floor Wars Patreon-only Discord server awaits you. I and the other patrons can't wait to welcome you with open arms and a fistful of dice. So Shep, what's interesting for me is if I were to ask you this question, which is, what's the first time you were a professional in this industry? That'd be easy, right? You'd say, how do we define professional? This was the first time it happened, Craig. What I'd like to do before we jump into talking about things that you've created for so many other different companies, when is the first time you felt like a professional?
Yeah, sure. Okay. That's actually quite easy for me to answer. The first time I felt like a professional in the games industry was when I came on board to complete the writing of Slay Industries Cannibal Sector 1, which was the final book for the first edition of Slay Industries, and then move into being the rules developer for Slay Industries second edition. So as a game, that was a benchmark of my teenage years.
Right.
To be asked to be literally, at that point in time, I was a director of Nightfall Games. So, and I was I was there as a director purely to help direct that creative process of that. And I'm I still, and I largely owe most of this to a guy who you should also speak to at some point. A really fantastic guy, Mark Rapson, who owns Wordforge Games and is a director of Nightfall Games as well. I owe everything to a chance meeting with Mark at Essen some years ago now. And that's a whole story in itself. But basically, as a result of that, I ended up coming in to Nightfall Games with him as part of helping them overcome a significant hurdle, which could have been the end of Slay Industries forever.
Wow.
And at that time I'd done little bits of rules development, and I'd actually done some freelance work for Mark shortly after meeting at Essen on board games rulebook development. But then he kind of clicked onto my writing style and my my kind of need for accuracy in rules writing, and also the fact that I was a huge Slay Industries fan from my teenage years, and that he had this opportunity. And before you know it, I wrote, I think, 75,000 words for Cannibal Sector 1. It's a ridiculously big book. Like, it's bigger than the core rule book. It's massive. And then people, like, Slay Industries has a very passionate, be it kind of niche audience, like a very passionate player base, and to have those people being like, this content, this is cool, this is great, oh, I really love your writing, like, being recognized as one of the people behind what I always considered to be, one of the greatest roleplay games of all time. Like, I remember sitting back and almost having tears in my eyes, being like, this book, when that came in print and my copy arrived in the post, I was like, if I never do anything else in gaming again now, having my name, having been able to open that page and go, I wrote that for Slay Industries.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like, that was everything to me, And even now, I look back, at that period in time, like, I'm super, super proud of doing that. And I'm really proud of Dave and Jared and Mark for, like, really hammering Slay Industries forward into the new era. Like, they've done a phenomenal job. And that was the point where I was like, okay, Slay Industries on my CV now. What else is out there? Like, this is where it can start now. And honestly, it was. That opened the door to me to work on other things. People were like, what have you worked on? I worked on Slay Industries. Okay, here's some writing. And that happened quite a bit in the years that followed. The way we mentioned at the start that I have a day job with Modiphius, and Modiphius are a super cool employer in that they really encourage their employees to go out and create their own stuff. It's why I have a publishing company and I'm able to freelance for other people. They're not like a company who are like, you work for us, so you work for us. And the reason I actually first touched base with Modiphius was because through chance meetings at conventions, the then line manager was like, you've written on Slay Industries, you need to come and write for Infinity. Okay. And so that was how I first met Modiphius, was by working on Infinity. Ironically, the line manager at the time for Infinity with Modiphius, Ben Graybeaton, is now the rules shepherd for Nightfall Games and looks after the Slay Industries rule set. We've just all swapped. Everybody swapped around. It's very incestuous. So, but yeah, that opened a lot of doors for me, and was the point where I said, okay, that is a professional writing credit. This is not just a guy dabbling with a bit of writing in the back. Like, he's worked on a big brand, and his stuff is really good. And I was very proud of what I did there. And that was definitely the first time I felt that.
So, a couple questions. One, what you said about Slay Industries has proven in my experience as well, which is, this is a phrase I've never heard somebody say, which is, Slay Industries fine. Those words have never been spoken. It's either, oh my God, you have not played this game before, we're going to stop everything right now. We're going to sit down. I'm going to show this, and just, evangelical just loves or no, that's garbage. I never want to play it. Right. There's nobody in between. For those listening that may not be familiar with Slay Industries, and I would imagine a good number of my listeners aren't, what the hell's going on there? Why is it that there's nobody lukewarm about Slay Industries? Why does it have such a passionate core fan base, do you think?
Man, it's hard to put a single thing down on it. Like, I mean, it's most of its fan base obviously has been with it since the start, since the early 90s, since first edition Slay. And at the time, I think there wasn't a huge amount of role playing coming out of the UK. It is at its core very British.
It is.
It's dark, it's dank, it's raining. It is basically the sci-fi equivalent of Glasgow in the 80s and 90s. And like, it had so much going for it at the time, like, it had lots and lots of fiction in that core book and those first few books that weren't just like the same old fiction that you got in other sci-fi games at the time. It wasn't just like two guys walking down the street getting in a fight. Like, it was fiction that left you like, what the fuck is going on? Like, real mind-bending weirdness with like aliens and like supernatural and so much going off. And there's cannibals and serial killers on the television. Like, what is going off? And the artwork was next level for games at that time. You know, having, you know, one of the driving force behind Slay Industries being Dave Alsop, who, you know, was also worked on Magic the Gathering and, you know, like so many other IP. Like, there aren't many artists out there that produce the quality that Dave Alsop produces, and there is nobody else's mind in the world that could have dreamt up the world of Slay Industries. And, you know, what Dave and Jared and the other contributors did at the time with that, pulling artists in. And there's you look at the art credits for that original book, and you've got Johnny Hodgson, who went on to do all the Lord of the Rings art for Cubicle 7. You've got Clint Langley, who went on to do Judge Dredd and the ABC Warriors. Like, sure, it was black and white art. It was art at the time, but there was just nothing. Like, save some of the high budget artwork that was in Vampire the Masquerade. Like, nothing stood up aesthetically to Slay Industries. And they did such an amazing job of building a immersive, violent, and frankly bizarre world that there was just nothing else like it. But being a British role-playing game, even during the limited time that Wizards of the Coast picked it up, and as I understand it, the main reason they picked it up is because they wanted Dave and Jared to work for them on other things, as opposed to, like, it was like, we'll come to you, but Slay comes part of the deal. Even during that time, you know, getting hold of it, the exposure to the marketplace was it was tough. It's like you said, lots of people don't know what it is. I know, I'm sure some of your listeners now are frantically Googling it and spelling it wrong. It's SLA
I was just going to say that.
Industries. Yeah, it was just very special. And then the Karma source book came out, and it blew people's minds because, like, you open the Karma source book and you expect it to be like every other role-play game source book. Here's more weapons, here's more world. And it was like a magazine. Like, every page had a completely different layout design. Some of it looked like things stuck on notice boards, and some of it was just pure fiction. Like, this is a magazine article about some guy that, like, he's run out of food and this is where he's going to go find. Like, it's just so random. And like it was just amazing. People were like, oh, and I mean, you only have to look on eBay to see what a copy of the Karma source book goes for now, and you're like, okay, this is like obviously something quite special. So yeah, like it's hard to pinpoint. There's so many reasons why Slay was exciting, and in my opinion still is today. You know, like it was a benchmark of role playing. It's still probably the biggest British role play that ever existed. And if you were a role player in the 90s in the UK, going to role play clubs, going to your local game store where there were role play games, like, you would have seen a copy of the first edition book on the shelf, and you'd have flicked through it and you'd have probably wet your pants at the artwork. And so yeah, I mean, I can understand a lot of the US and Canada and Australia and other markets probably never really saw a lot of it, but damn, they were special books.
No, and I'd heard, and again, everybody knows they can scroll down. We'll have links to Slay Industries so you can explore it, but it is SLA. You know, it had always been kind of in the zeitgeist for me. Like, I would hear about it, I would see it, I for the long time called it SLA, and then finally met somebody who knew the game. They're like, no, it's Slay. And I'm like, okay. And you talk about the artwork, man, the most recent Kickstarter. Flipping through Kickstarter, and I'm like, what the F is this? And then I'm like, oh, and I made the connection, right? Like, this is not a new game. This is a very old game. And I just went all in. It hasn't been fulfilled yet, but I'm really excited to finally like dive into this world, because even if I bounce off of it, I'm excited to see exactly what you're talking about, which is this incredibly passionate following has to come from something. And I've also heard that the community as a community is amazing as well. That, you know, you might look at it as kind of like this dark dystopian edge world type of setting, but the community is just full of great people is all I keep hearing. So I'm excited to kind of go into it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And the new books, they look stunning. You know, like, I mean, Dave and you know, and his chosen art crew are still producing like
unbelievable
next level artwork.
Yeah.
And the content is still as mind bending as ever. And
I'm excited.
yeah, you're gonna absolutely love it when you open the second edition core book and you read the piece of fiction, the 1-page piece of fiction on the inside cover of that book.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to be like, huh? Like, what? And then you'll read the next piece of fiction. You'll be like, okay, what's going off? Like, and you
cool.
won't be able to put the book down. Like, it's fantastic. They've just done such an amazing job with it. Yeah, no, it's brilliant.
So you finish that. You've now got some cred, right? And your work on Slay has given you that cred. When you now look at your path, what is the next big landmark for you? What was the kind of the next big moment for you professionally?
I think the next big thing was getting a full-time job for a games company. So when we were doing the Slay stuff originally, you know, we all had jobs. For other things, Marco and WordForge Games. I was freelancing as a business development manager for a finance company, and Dave was doing artwork for you know, various publishers and various games as he does, and Jared that runs his IT infrastructure business, and things were going really well for WordForge, and Mark Rapson sort of employed me. I was still doing the Slay stuff on the side, but he employed me to do project management work for WordForge Games because they were growing their games portfolio. They'd seen some great success with D-Day Dice on Kickstarter, and so I think for about 6 months or so, I had my first full-time job in the games industry and I'd earned good money off freelance writing and stuff before then, but to work full-time in games is very different. And that was really great, be it relatively short-lived. You know, WordForge couldn't sustain multiple employees, and it was a short-term thing, but it was great.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after that, I had the opportunity to move to Modiphius. So that came through, again, a who you know situation, a guy who, and actually that only came about because I'd worked on Slay Industries. So this is an interesting little story. A big passionate member of the Slay Industries community, who's also an RPG creator himself, a guy called Mark Whittington. He makes a small cyberpunk RPG called Black Code, which is a cool little indie game. He works for Modiphius as a graphic designer. And he basically, Modiphius were looking for a new project manager, and he knew of me through Slay Industries because he now owned the books that I had worked on, and I was quite vocal in the community fan groups and stuff. You know, we all talked there as ourselves, and we'd spoken, you know, just as a, you know, creator to player of a game, and he knew we'd kind of linked up on LinkedIn and websites like that, and he'd seen my previous experience and knew that I did project management, business development, and he just got in touch with me on LinkedIn and was like, "Hey Shep, it's Mark from, you know, the Slay fan group. We're looking for a project manager. Are you interested?" And I'm like, "Hell yes, here's a CV." And then short time later, I ended up in the employment of Modiphius, and that was like, okay, I've gone from freelancing, be it on phenomenal IPs, to working for a, you know, small to medium publisher for a short period of time, to a company that I guess are considered to be one of the biggest RPG publishers in the marketplace. And that
it's amazing the path that Chris has taken with that company, and where that company, and for some people, especially those of us on this side of the pond, it seemed to come out of nowhere. And it was just like all of a sudden Modifius was everywhere, and the quality of shit that was coming out of those doors, you just couldn't ignore it. The closest thing I've seen to it, and they're tied a little bit to each other, is Free League did the same thing for us here in the States. Just like, what the hell? Like all of a sudden, like add water and you've got, not on, obviously we've had Chris on the show, not realizing there's a lot of history that went into that. But yeah, I consider Modifius definitely one of the bigger non-WotC companies out there, and both in quantity as quality as well.
Yeah, as a company, we do some great stuff. There was those early days of the Kickstarters that really like made that company explode. The creation of Act on Cthulhu, which is Chris's original baby, if you like, and it makes some great stuff. And when I first went to Modifius as a project manager, I effectively was the project manager behind Conan, although
Beautiful.
we were aware that Conan's license was kind of on the horizon. So I kind of looked after most of the last chapter, or at least laid the groundwork for the last sort of few chapters of that line, and Act on Cthulhu. And I also joined the company, and I started taking over Dune as a line. So the core book had just come out, and we were gearing up for the first source book, and then that's when I got involved in driving the next few releases of Dune out. So yeah.
So as a guy who loves rules, as a guy who loves mechanics, talk to me about your original, and obviously I'm sure it's adapted since then, but what was your original reaction to Jay Little's 2D20, concept? When you first saw the 2D20 thing, like, what was your first reaction to it?
My first reaction, like, I wasn't sold. Like, and I'm saying, like, all my friends at Modifius, like, they might listen to this and be like, Shep, like, that's blasphemy. Like, so I wasn't sold first off, right? But I think anybody now can look back at particularly things like Infinity and Conan and realize that at that point, 2D20 was quite a crunchy system.
Yeah.
And I would say that my hesitation with the system was very much the same issue I had with Dungeons and Dragons back in the days. That the system was very good and it covered everything, but it was maybe just a bit too much for my normal liking of systems. But when I started working with the system, and I wasn't working in a rules development sense with it, but I had hands on it, and I was talking with creators and writers and people that are creating content for the 2D20 system, I started to really understand its merits and that it is also at its core, the core mechanic of that game is so beautifully simple to explain to people and learn. And what makes it seem complicated to some players is the amount of extras that can be added, which a lot of the time can be viewed as optional. But the core mechanic is very simple and it works really well. And over the lines that followed, so as we moved away from Conan and Infinity, and we gave birth to systems like Dune, and the revisions and development that Nathan Dowdall did to 2D20 to bring it into the modern age are just fantastic. And the beauty that we can now mold 2D20 and give it some thematic flavoring for the relevant world and system, and do with it some really interesting. I mean, Dune in particular, with the way it deals with the asset cards, and it's a really clever way to use that system. And Dune even does away with the D6 damage system. It's purely D20s. But then we have Act on Cthulhu, that is if you like, the evolution of the system that people knew from Conan and Infinity and John Carter of Mars, and has been streamlined in such a massive way from its original inception that now it's a hugely popular system that we get masses of love for,
Yeah.
and is now to a point where, you know, Nathan is able to mold and adapt that to new systems as it comes out in in a really great way. So yeah, it's a really nice system. But yeah, I absolutely have put my hand up and say when I first had hands on it in the early days, it fell into that bit too crunchy for me category. But what it is now, like, I think it's a great system. I think it's an industry benchmark.
I could not agree more. And I had a similar journey as you did. And I think we'll move on to other things, obviously, here in a second. But I think one of the biggest testaments to where it is now is that I'm a huge system matters person, right? I'm a firm believer that you need to create a game mechanically that supports the type of game that's going to get played. And there's generic systems or generic engines, whatever the hell you want to call them out there, that I don't think support play. 2D20 does. 2D20 supports Achtung Cthulhu. It supports Star Trek Adventures, and then it supports Dune. And yes, there are tweaks between the core system in all three of them, but the core is still there, and its ability to support very different types of play, I think it's a testament. So I am completely aligned and agree with you on that. With I'm going to give you a scenario, Shep. I say, hey, you know, Shep, I'm going to come over to the house. Can you put together just a pile of the stuff that you've made for others that you're the most proud of? That just, you know, I know one book, we talked about it for Slay Industries, that would obviously be in that pile, but, and this doesn't necessarily mean these were the biggest things you worked on. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that they had the most widespread visibility, but you as a creator, as a creative, what would I find in that pile for you?
That I made for other people. Okay. So as a creative, as a writer, obviously Slay Industries, the Cannibal Sector 1, but also the core book for second edition. You know, the rule system that's contained for Slay, the S5S system, which is now also to be found in the Terminator RPG and the Stokerverse RPG, and pretty much anything else that Nightfall Games work on. That was all my work at that point in time. And Ben Graybeaton now develops that and twists it and adjusts it. He does what Nathan Dowdle does for Modiphius. He adjusts the core system and make it work for the new game, and he's doing great work with that. But that core book for Slay Industries second edition, I'm really, really proud of that, and that would definitely be high on my list. It was a hard book to sell with the very passionate fan base, you know, who they want Slay to evolve and they want Slay to change, but they also don't want anything to change. Yes. So coming out with a new rule system that was kind of a bit more streamlined and a bit more modern, but also wouldn't alienate people that liked a bit of depth. Like, that was a hard challenge. And
that's a tough needle to thread.
Yeah, it was a really tough needle to thread. And, you know, like I'm even the UK Games Expo only a few weeks ago, I was actually there with my own product with Hansa Publishing, but I was shared a stand with the Nightfall guys, and I had so many people ask me to sign their Slay books, which was hugely humbling. And you know, I had a few people be like, well, I really wish you hadn't done that with the rules, Shep. And you're like, yeah, but if we hadn't, we would still have the first edition. Right? Anyway, it's all good. But I'm hugely proud of that. Also, I guess is another game that a lot of people probably don't know is the Devil's Run RPG. Devil's Run was a very successful board game for Wordforge Games, one of the games that launched Wordforge Games, which was your kind of Mad Max style. Great board game with a rolling road. When you got to the end of the board, you took the other end of the board and moved it over. And even the box itself was part of the board. It was the tunnel. And there was a tunnel printing. It was brilliant. Great game. So Mark at Wordforge licensed out the IP to Red Scar, who unfortunately are no longer our publisher. They've exited the industry now, as many people have since COVID. But they created the RPG set in the world. You know, if you ever wanted to play Mad Max, the RPG, this is as close as you're going to close as you're going to get. And I wrote a significant chunk of the core book, all of the faction. Like this was an interesting one for me because I didn't work on the rules development. I worked on the setting and the lore and evolving the information about the factions and the people. And I do love the world. I still play Devil's Run on games night quite regularly, and making that book was a real joy. In fact, I'm very sad that the line didn't continue. There haven't been source books and content. That's that's definitely a great one. And I'm definitely proud of those last few Infinity source books. When I got on board to work for Modiphius, I would say probably a copy of Hypercorps. There's some, like, when I got involved in Infinity, I was told, everything has to go through the licensor. Obviously, Corvus Belli, they're very protective of their IP and they know their world very well. So whilst we can suggest new things, we have to try and play within the ballpark, right? Mm-hmm. And that was my first time working on an IP where you had to go through approvals. And Hypercorps is the one book where I actually made up loads of new stuff, and Corvus Belli said yes to it all.
Oh,
so that was
huge.
I was like, oh man, I made this mech, and they said yes. And then I made this medicine, and they said yes. And then I made this crazy technology and they said yes. And I'm like, awesome. Having your stuff injected as canon into somebody else's world is really exciting. So Hypercorps would be there definitely. As a non-creative, there's probably, so as a project manager working on other things, right at the end of the Conan life cycle, we released Shadows of the Sorcerer, which was a source book, a campaign book. Now, that book has a really long history. It was written in its entirety by Jason Doral, who is an industry heavyweight and was the original line manager for Conan at Modiphius back in the day. And as I understand it, and you'd have to get Jason on the show to answer the questions exactly.
He's been on, but keep going.
Jason had basically written this campaign for Mongoose however many years ago they had the license, 15 or however long ago it was. And they lost that license before they published it, and it just sat on the shelf. And we were like, we need to end this line on a real high point. What can we do? And Jason was like, Shadow of the Sorcerer still exists. And we're like, can you finish it? Can you revisit it? Can you do 2D20 it? And can you finish it? And, we worked with Jason on doing that really closely. And we also had a new art director come in, Rothio Martin. She came in to work on the artwork, and some of the artwork in that book is just it's the best art that we did for Conan, with the best campaign we did for Conan, with some of the best writing we did for Conan, and I got to manage that from idea to getting it out. And I'm really proud of that piece of work because the book is stunning. There's one piece of art in that book that's everybody says, what's the best piece of art you can think of from Modiphius? And there's an underground river, and there's this 20-foot alligator capsizing a boat, and it's just so brilliantly done. The art direction and the artist's work was just incredible. And it's so moody. Every piece of art in that book is strongly connected to the text. There's no generic art, which is a very rare thing for role-play games. It's actually something I'm very passionate about. If we touch on Hansa stuff, I'm really into that whole, every piece of art tells the story. You don't have anything that's just, it's Conan, It has to be what's happening on that page. And so, and we did that with Shadow of the Sorcerer, and that book is incredible. Jason Doral knocked it out the park with that campaign. And so, I'm really proud of that. And I would definitely put that in my pile.
So I've got that book, and what Lord of the Rings is for you, Robert E. Howard was for me, right? And not because Robert E. Howard is better or worse than anybody else. It's just when I was a kid, my introduction to fantasy was Conan, right? Yeah. And I just consumed it. And I can say this with enough. I think if anybody argued with me, I could back it up. I think that book is the most Conan book, not only in the Modiphius line, but might be the most Conan book that I've read for any RPG set in that setting. And for all the reasons you listed, the writing, like everybody involved, from the art to the writing to the mechanic of the campaign itself. It is so Conan. And it's the only thing I would ever, I mean, I own the 2D20 Conan. I've never run it, but that's all I'm going to do is pull that book out. And this is how I'm going to play it for that exact reason. So that's cool.
I absolutely agree. And as a company and as an individual, like, it's a book that I think I can say we're all very proud of. And, and I've already said on this call, I'm not a guy that does campaigns, pre-written campaigns, right? Like, that's not my thing. And I would still pull Shadow of the Sorcerer off the shelf to run because it is very special.
It is. No, I completely agree. So, guys, we're going to take another break. When we get back from this break, we're going to stop talking about making stuff for other people. We're going to start talking about making stuff for ourselves. We're going to get into the Gaia complex. We'll be right back.
You like science fiction, right? You love playing games, maybe even role-playing games. But what if you can't get your friends together for a game night? If you love games like Mothership or Orbital Blues, check out Dead Belt, a card-based space western solo strategy RPG about skillful and desperate scavengers picking over the remains of junked starships in hopes of a juicy payday. In it, you deal with lurking dangers, push your luck, and walk away with enough cred to keep on flying. Of course, you might get eaten by lurking aliens, or run afoul of rival scavengers, or face the murderous ghosts of long-dead spacers. No one said life in the Dead Belt was going to be easy. For more information on this and all of Sean and Abby Drake's games, swing over to acoupleofdrakes.com. The link's in the show notes.
I feel like here in this first hour, we've done a really good job, I think, understanding, Shep, your origins, where you've come from, the things that you've created for others, the things that you have excited you as a gamer and as a creator. But at some point, this little thing called Gaia Complex starts to talk in the back of your head. And just so for those of you not familiar with it, I'm going to read a little bit of the blurb off the website so everybody can get a context, but we're going to go back in time. So the Gaia Complex is a cyberpunk RPG set on Earth in 2119. Small pockets of humanity survived the horrific resource war, eventually forming the 11 metropolises, which have managed to grow and prosper due to the development of atmospheric processing and significant technological advancements. The Gaia Complex focuses on the largest of these metropolises, New Europe, a single sprawling city that covers much of mainland Europe. New Europe is a world of street violence, corporate espionage, vampiric uprisings, and an overzealous AI known as Gaia, which functions as the city's governor and protector of its citizens. Holy shit, dude. And what's cool about reading that, Shep, is that I can hear so much of what we talked about in the first hour, right? So, but this thing does not exist, right? So I go to the Shep Museum and I take my daughter and I say, honey, we got to go to the Gaia Complex section of the museum. And we go there. What's the first acorn? So where does that story start?
Firstly, I'm really sorry for your daughter that you're going to drag her around the Shep Museum. Okay, so that comes. So back when I was working on Slay Industries, I was very much in writer mode. Yeah, it's the first time where I had a job or messing with games where I was basically writing. Some days for an hour, some days for 8 hours. I was in writer mode, and your mind wanders. Okay, and I had an idea for a novel that I really wanted to write. Like, I was like, I have a story that I want to tell. Okay. Inspired by, everything from the role-play games I was involved in and, Slay Industries and movies that I love. And I just had a story. I had a start. I had a middle. I had some characters in my mind. I probably had an end, although that's definitely gone out the window now. So I had a story that I wanted to tell, and I started writing it when I found the headspace to be able to do that. I started writing bits, bullet pointing scenes. What's the middle look like? So I worked on that a little bit, and then I realized I'm never going to write a novel. This is ridiculous. Like, that is a lot of words. I wrote 75,000 words for Cannibal Sector 1, and that was a huge amount of words. Like, I'm never going to write a novel. Like, you can't break it up with rules. Like, that's going to kill me. So, I kind of put it on the shelf, but not too long afterwards, I kind of was like, yeah, but you do make games. You do write games. And maybe this story can be told through a game. Okay, so I'm like, okay, let me see how this will work. And the first thing I did is I took I guess what you would call like from the start to the reveal in the middle of the story, and I broke it into episodic short fiction. Like a couple of thousand words a piece over about 12 bits. And it read a bit like you would expect the overview of a Netflix series to run. Here's 12 episodes introducing first few introduce different characters, and then you learn how they connect, and then you kind of find out what the big conspiracy is and why they're important. And I was like, okay, I've just written 12 chapter intros. I'm going to make a game that has a real meta plot, and that's clearly inspired by Slay Industries, right? That like has a meta plot, but unlike Slay Industries, I'm going to tell you what that meta plot is at the end of the book, like everything. I'm going to spill my secrets by having the plot twist in the book. Okay, and I'd written this thing, and it was a character-driven fiction. Okay. So then I started fleshing out the world that these characters exist in, and yeah, before too long, it just spiraled. And then I hit the bit where I'm like, okay, rules. Okay, this really is my thing now.
Right.
Let me make a system completely bespoke to this setting that just feels like this setting. And you know what? I'm doing this on my own. Like, nobody else has to like it. Like, absolutely and utterly my rules. If I don't want it in the game, it doesn't go in there, no matter how many people ask for it. If I do, it's going in. And
so pause for just a second, if we could here, because this, I think, is a big deal in my mind. It's very clear that you're a rules guy. It's very clear that you just don't accept rules, right? You're saying, like, this is important. System matters. I'm drawn to some games because of the rules. There's other games that I've bounced off of so rules, mechanics, and all of that's a big deal to you. You now are in an opportunity, Shep, where no one's telling you anything, right? This thing could be literally anything mechanically. And I want to get a sense, when you like now have this empty sandbox with everything you've learned, what was the initial North Star? Because you have to start somewhere, right, to build these mechanics and to start fresh. What was that initial North Star for you?
Well, you're going to find it probably quite silly, but the initial North Star for the rules for the Gaia complex were, so I had played, we talked earlier on about Devil's Run.
Yes.
Okay. Devil's Run was the first time. I'm going to show you something on video now, but I'll explain it so people know what that is. So yeah. Devil's Run, as part of its dice pool uses these. Okay, these are D3s that are kind of like little kidney bean shaped things. They're really weird. Okay, these are the best dice I have ever rolled. Like, these die are just amazing. They just feel right when you roll them. Like, they're like roll around in your hand and they're weighty. They're beautiful die, and they're bizarre. And anyway, I love the dice, and so I was like, right, that's my North Star. I want to use those dice in a game. And that was it. And I was like, what? But okay, I mess around with mechanics. You play with the numbers. It needs a bit more than that. What else does it need? Okay, well, it has to use the underrepresented superhero of the dice industry. That is the D12, right? Like, it's an amazing dice. It just rolls right and it's great. Like, it's chunky and it's a beautiful shape and nobody uses them, right? And that was it. I was like, that's it. I have to make something thematic that works, that uses D12s and uses D3s. So frustratingly, I had a concept of a core mechanic in my head that needed to use D10s. Like, it had to use D10s. And so I'm like, am I going to sacrifice the idea just to prove a point to myself that I can make the D12s? So I initially dropped the D12 idea, and I built the rules around what my gut told me, which was the D10 and the mechanic. Anyway, I have a very good group of playtesters for role-play games that I rely on, and I sent it out to them, and they had some feedback about some issues that they faced with the D10 and the way I had developed that system. And there was one really obvious solution to the problem, and that was to change the scale to 12 and use the D12.
Isn't that funny?
I did that and sent it back to them. They're like, this is amazing. And I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, like I forced myself to not just go down with the use the cool dice route. And I, unfortunately, playtesting demanded that I use the cool dice. So obviously there's more to it than just picking the dice and stuff. You know, I've got a lot of experience. I've worked with a lot of systems. I've played a lot of systems, and I am inspired by many of them. And there are things I dislike about a lot of roleplay systems, which I was able to identify what I don't like about them, and there are things I do like. And I didn't spare any expense in time when it came to writing and testing the system that became known as 12.3, okay, based on the dice. And I think it's fair to say I am more proud of that system design than any other piece of games design that I have ever worked on. That's saying a lot. Like, there's no disrespect to anything else that I've worked on, you know, like I have worked on some systems that I am very proud of, and we've talked about those already. But there's something about this system, and people have played it. And obviously, the Gaia Complex is a small game still. You know, I've got a mailing list of about 600 people, and I've sold maybe 1,000 books around the world, like all in. We're still very small fry. Yeah. And the amount of emails I've had from people just complimenting me on the design of the system has really shocked me. I'm like, does that happen in the games industry? Do people just feel the need to come and tell you that the system is awesome? And I'm just really humbled by people that want to tell me that, and like, you know, come to me at a convention and say, "Oh, I'm not here to buy anything off you, but I have your game. I backed it on Kickstarter, and my group love your dice system. We love it."
What are they saying? What are they saying here, Shep? So what is it that what is it in 12.3 that is just making people be very vocal? Because the majority of people who like something say nothing, right? Now, if they don't like it, they're going to let you know. That's true of everything you create. But what is it that you are hearing from them that they are just, why is it clicking at such a rate?
So things that I've heard a lot, being able to do a whole group's character creation in half an hour. Yeah. Like, your session 0 is 30 minutes, without that being like, there's so much depth to the characters. Now, obviously, you can go away and write your character's backstory, but you know, stats, skills, nitty gritty, equipment. Like, the longest part of character creation is choosing what you're going to spend your money on from the hardware catalog, right? Because I spared no page count on having a significant hardware catalog in that core book. So, but the core crux of the characters, like, you can go through the whole process with a large group, 6, 7, 8 players, be done in 30, 40 minutes,
Wow.
Start playing the game. Like, that's huge for people when it is not necessarily the lightest system you've ever played. Yeah. It's not one where there's like 3 stats and then we just tell a story. Yeah. There is dice rolling involved. So that's a big one. The other one is that the core mechanic of the game just is super simple to explain, and it works really well. And the core mechanic is roll under your stat on 2d12. Yeah. If you have the relevant skill, you need one of those dice to be a success. And if you do not have the relevant skill, you need both of those dice to be the success. That is the core of the entire system.
Nice.
Okay. And everybody gets it. Stats generally run from 1 to 10. So an 11 always fails, and 12 is like really, really, really bad. Yeah. And so the basis is, do I have the relevant skill? This is a test for awareness. Do I have the awareness skill? Yes. I need one of these dice to be a success. No, I need 2 of them to be a success. And you can play a whole session not needing any more rules than that.
Wow.
Okay. And the actual rules chapter of the book starts with a little half-page rant from me that basically says, hi, I'm Shep, and my ethos to games design is just only roll dice when you really need to. Like, I could quite happily play a session where you never roll a dice, but I am aware that role players do like to own and roll dice. So pick the mechanics in here that work for you and completely ignore the rest. Just do not compromise the story and the immersion and the experience for the rules ever. Please just play the game. So I know people that have taken that core mechanic and just not bothered reading about the rest of the stuff.
Interesting.
Like, I've got that core mechanic. I can see the damage statistic on a weapon. I'll make the rest work. Other people will take the whole lot. One thing I've been really keen to do, and this is the other thing that people have said to me, like, what we really like, is I have this like core rules for the game that are important, that, you know, like how to do skill rolls, what actions can be taken, how to resolve a combat, how you die, how you can speak a language, you know, the basic things that people are going to ask. And then all the other rules are clearly labeled in the book as optional.
Neat.
You know, like, they're like, here are the rules for hitting specific locations of the body. Here are the rules for bleeding. Here are the rules for ingesting toxins. Here are the rules for setting your drones to go on like autopilot. Like, but they're all like, this is optional, big optional word, you know? Like, if you are a GM and a play group that like grit, you can throw everything in and have a moderately chunky system. If you are a play group that want to run a more narrative game, anything that says optional next to it doesn't exist. Just forget about it. You don't need it to play the game. I put it there for people that want more. And people are like, that's just so cool. Like, we get to open the rule book and be like, this system's got a bit of meat to it, but we can just ignore all of that stuff. Like, I don't need to. There's rules for being knocked over and needing to get back up. And there's rules for like morale. So the longer you're in a firefight, your morale goes down till eventually you bottle and freeze and have to hide until somebody takes the rally action to help you get back on your feet. So yeah, that's really good. And I think the last piece of feedback I get that's positive is that I've separated hit points, if we'll use that term, into 2 categories, which we call endurance and pressure. One is physical damage and one is psychological damage, and both things can kill you or harm you. So if you are the subject of some sort of hacking attempt, but also if you've suffered significant effects of low morale or, you know, various sort of more out there weaponry, you can have significant psychological damage. You can become subject to fears, and you can, you know, or have actual physical brain damage inflicted. That is completely separate to physical harm. And it's really easily tracked. It's very clear what things harm what part of you. And, you know, you can be psychologically very stable, but on your last legs physically,
Right.
and vice versa. And people really like that addition because it isn't hard for them to follow, but adds a lot of kind of immersion to the world.
Yeah, definitely. So before we move on to talk about Rectify, one last thing I want to talk about with Gaia, which is it's really easy to spend a lot of time on the origin, where it started. Easy to spend time on the middle, right? As you refine things. What I really find interesting when I talked about creating things is, how do you stop? So what was it that told you the core book's done, pencils down, go into the printers?
Yeah.
How did you know you were done?
Because it was getting too expensive to print. No, in all honesty, the core book. So I have a thing. I think RPG core books, on the whole, are too big.
Interesting.
Okay? I think once upon a time, the whole like 400-500 page core book was kind of like the norm, and like, man, it's just such a slog getting through it and finding stuff and referencing. Oh, there was a piece, they said this somewhere in a story, but I'm never going to find it again. And there was this wave a few years ago where people started to make much smaller books. And actually, when I was involved in Nightfall games, man, I really, really, really sold the idea that we needed to keep that core book small for second edition, and we did,
Yeah.
and I really, really like that. And so I set myself this thing here as like, keep this core book fairly small, but I have to tell this fiction, I have to tell this story, and it's a cyberpunk setting, so it needs a lot of gear in it, right?
Right.
And I'm a big fan of hardware, so the book is 288 pages. I'd originally set my goal at 250, but there is 100 pages of hardware in that book. Okay, now I wrote nearly 200 pages of hardware, and the second 100 pages of hardware became the Hardware 2119 source book, which we released in February. Well, actually, it's the first half of that source book. The second half is loads more, much darker content that I would have loved to have evolved out in the core book, but did get to a point where I'm like, this is too big. Yep. I've got to listen to myself. It's too big. So what can come out? And I started pruning the core book and putting content aside for future supplements.
Was that easy or hard for you to do?
It's hard. It was surprisingly easy for the hardware because there was so much of it. I'm like, you know what? I don't need like 15 handguns in this book. That's just ridiculous, Shep, what you're doing. Right. So that was fairly easy. But when it comes to evolving like the story and the background on the less normal parts of that world, and I'm talking like vampirism and the ferals, which are like a sort of subspecies stroke underground. They appear human in all ways, except they are more prone to genetic mutations, and they are able to imprint their consciousness into animals. So they can crawl into a little coma somewhere and then play the rest of the session as a rat. Or
interesting.
Like, you get to role play as an animal if you play a feral, which is a huge advantage, but as they also have some disadvantages to balance them out. But it makes some phenomenal role playing experience. You know, like I saved up my money and I bought a genetically cloned snake, and I am going to play as that snake. God damn it! You know, like it's pretty cool. So we have an illustration in the Hardware 2119 book of a bear with 4 cybernetic arms. And I'm like, somebody is playing that bear. So, like taking out the content of things which like support my meta plot, which support the conspiracy of the world, that was really hard. And I ended up having to pick a theme and take out all the content on that theme.
Got it.
And that became the second half of Hardware 2119. And that theme was the black market and the blood trade. Okay, 2 of the very darker point. I touched on them. I planted the seed in the core book, and then I gave myself half a source book to evolve that. But sticking to page count was a big lesson learned. for that core book. And so now with my source book working, when I start, I have a page count limit at the beginning.
Right.
I know how many words I get on a page without art. And Hardware 2119 ended up at 128 pages. It was like 110, and then it went up with stretch goals. And I now know the recipe there works. So 128 pages is my max limit for a core book ever. Like, I'm going to say that now. Gaia Complex is me. I do it my way. I will never go over 128 pages for a source book.
Yeah.
It means that I can create a book in a year, 18 months tops. It's as a small publisher with a small product line, if you go silent for 2 or 3 years, it's dead. Yeah. So like 128 pages max. So let's say between 80 and 128 pages means a book a year for the Gaia Complex going forward.
Right.
That's a recipe that is very important to me because I have a big story to tell and I love making that game and I want to keep telling it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about, I think there's a lot of reasons I wanted Shep on the show. Reading this game made it imperative that I get Shep on the show. We're going to talk about Rectify. We'll be right back. Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode. So Shep, mutual friend of ours, that's how we got connected, Anthony Boyd, Runeslinger. The conversation with Anthony started with, Craig, have you heard anything about this Rectify solo game? And I'm like, no, never heard of it. No idea. And he goes, let me tell you 2 things, right? Tells me 2 things about it. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? So you gave me a little bit of a sneak peek, which I do appreciate, but everybody listening, if you're listening when this is released, you know the routine, right? The Kickstarter's out there. You've got the link. You got to check this damn thing out, but I want to talk about it. So let me give you the blurb first. Rectify is an immersive solo role-playing experience about facing death and atoning for the wrongs of an ill-spent life. Now, the ninja word in here is immersive. So that's where I want to start before we talk about where the hell this game came from. So how do you get off telling me that a solo role-playing game is immersive? What does that mean?
Well, Rectify is quite unique. I think it's fair for me to say it's quite unique the way that the game is played. Okay, so it's a game of 2 halves. It is, I guess, what many people would call a journaling game. Mm-hmm. On one hand, you spend some time creating a story through whatever means that may be, in a sort of mindfulness, self-meditative state. Though it is worth noting at this point that those states of mind and the whole process of mindfulness is generally to focus on very positive energies and outcomes. Rectify deliberately guides you to the darker corners of your mind. And I believe does an adequate job of providing the required safety tools to go with that. But still, it is deliberately pushing you to the darker imagery that your mind may create. Right. And inevitably, whatever the experience ends up being, in line with the scene that is described in the book, you will spend a little bit of time writing down your story and recording it for the future. So that that is not that is in itself quite immersive. You are creating imagery and you're spending time with it, and we recommend using sensory deprivation to really enhance this, whether that's just putting some earbuds in and having complete silence and your eyes closed. I mean, we touched slightly off the call earlier on about, like, I'm actually a qualified hypnotherapist, a mind coach. Like, it's something I used to do for a living a long time ago, and I still use those skills with families and friends. But the power to your imagination of just having your eyes closed for 10 minutes is unbelievable, like unbelievable. And so that in itself is an immersive experience. However, that is not the reason I describe the game as being immersive. The reason I use that term is because Rectify explains that in this game, the player and their character are connected through a bizarre link, and that actions that you take as Crate will help to drive forward the story and impact and influence the arc of what's happening. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, that means depending on the particular scenario, each of which has a theme, various what we call pledges should be carried out by the player. And these are obviously suggested. Anybody that isn't comfortable with doing so doesn't need to do so. You can treat this as a normal journaling game.
Right.
And you can also, if you think you've got a better idea than the ones we suggest, go ahead. They would range from anywhere from filling your mouth with red hot chilies and refusing to open your mouth until they've all been eaten, to having an ice cold bath, to walking out into a crowded public place and screaming something motivational at the top of your voice. Okay? Other things might be to, I don't know, call an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend and apologize for what went wrong in the relationship. The idea is to take you out of your comfort zone in a range of different ways, either for physical discomfort or emotional discomfort, or maybe a sense of embarrassment, though the game doesn't strive to belittle or humiliate anybody.
Right.
It may just be that is the response that you feel that your character will best atone from. And so it wherever your mind takes you as to how you should achieve those pleasures is the way to go. And then you will roll the experience of that into what you're imagining with your character, and then you will record that experience. And playtesting was interesting.
I bet.
And feedback from people was just like jaw-dropping. They were like, I just didn't think I was... And people were like, I didn't think I could create worlds like this. I didn't think I could imagine things. Just the journaling side was just really enlightening and scary at times, where your mind can go and bringing up emotions. And but yeah, the whole physical pledging filled me with a sense of fear and exhilaration. And I said to those people, to all of them, I asked the same question: what experience in your life is that most like? What does it remind you of the most? And most people said, it reminds me of watching my first horror movie.
Wow.
Or an amazing horror movie. The first movie that really scared me, I went to bed that night and I slowed my breathing so I could hear what was in the room. And I'm like, you have just told me, that's the greatest compliment ever. I've created a solo horror role-playing game that's designed to take people out of their comfort zone and give them a lasting experience. And you're telling me it's like watching a horror movie. I am so proud of that feedback.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, that is what immersive means. I believe this is a very unique gaming experience. I am not firsthand aware of anything else that uses a similar process. I am aware of some phenomenal journaling games that inspired me to create a journaling game. but I'm not aware of anything that suggests you go and do this kind of stuff and record it and learn from it. And I think that's really, really empowering.
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm a huge consumer of indie material. Itch has more of my money than it should because I just really enjoy. I buy for every 20 games I buy, I play one of them. I like to consume games, and over time, you see a lot of the same things, maybe done in a very neat way. But it's now to the point in my life where it's pretty hard to show me something I haven't seen before. Now, I haven't seen everything, so I can't tell you that this is 100% unique. I'm sure there's somebody listening going, yeah, Greg Stafford created this back in 1978. But I've never seen anything like it. So I really, my big question is the pledge concept. The meta connection between player and character. Was that at the very beginning? Did it come later? Like, when did that bomb drop and what did it look like when it first hit?
So to answer that question, I should probably tell you where, when, and how I made the game.
Let's do it.
Like, wrote it. So, okay. So the original spark, the inspiration behind the game came from a couple of things, a couple of sources. The first was the work of two particular artists. One, his name is David, and his surname eludes me, and I apologize, but he owns a small clothing company in London, in the UK, called Lamort Clothing. I'm actually wearing one of his T-shirts right here. You can see it on the video. And he makes phenomenal occult artwork, like phenomenal, like skeletons and knights in armor and like twisted imagery, like absolutely mind-blowing, to the point that if he releases a T-shirt, I buy it, plain and simple.
Wow.
Like, just done deal. Like, my wardrobe is basically a Lamort Clothing warehouse. And the other is an artist that my little sister made me aware of. She's an illustrator herself, and she's a fan of this chap's work on Instagram. A guy called Albinus Design, and he does a lot of biro on paper artwork, and it's very dark, very occult. So those two, I had this thing in my brain, like I was really inspired by that artwork, and I really wanted to make a game that could use that black and white like artwork. Like I knew that I've always had this thing about the whole kind of like angels and demons, heaven and hell. I'm not a religious person. I don't think about those concepts in a religious context. But movies like Constantine and roleplay games like In Nomine that we talked about earlier, and I guess Cult, like the concept of humans and demons and angels walking, and like it's something about that. I have full-length wings tattooed down my back, like I actually do, because that concept excites me. And I felt like I could do something that used that style of occult artwork that was very dark, that would play into the sort of horror-edged writing that I had done for Slay Industries.
Right.
And like, I didn't know what that game would be, but I knew it needed to have this style of art, which meant it needed to be not a futuristic game. It needed to be like a present day thing. So that was one aspect of it. And the other aspect that really, really inspired me, and a lot of people might think this is really weird, is a movie which many people consider to be a bit shit. So it's a movie called As Above, So Below. It is a horror movie, quite a low budget, sort of found footage horror movie, like the Blair Witch. It's all on camcorders.
Yeah.
And it's about a group of people who are like, I think there's a really background brushed over storyline about a girl who is her dad was like a archaeologist, and she wanted to follow in his footsteps and find some artifact. But anyway, her and some friends persuade some people to break them into the catacombs under Paris, the skeleton-filled tunnel network.
Yeah.
And they do. And whilst they are in there, they find themselves trapped in an escapable loop. And the only way they can go is down further into the catacombs. And they do, and eventually, long story short, I won't spoil the whole thing, but they find that they have basically breached the gate to hell, which is in the Paris catacombs, and they have to try and claw their way back out. And that movie, people were like, yeah, it's a found footage movie, it's a bit, but there's something about it, and I can't really explain what it is. I think the performances are pretty good, and the imagery is okay, but there's something about it that is that really inspired me, really inspired me. And they even use the term at the end of the movie, like, we need to rectify to get out of here. And I watched that movie and I was like, okay, something in my brain has just happened. I need to just sit on this for a few days. And 24 hours later, I watched the movie again. I couldn't not watch it again. And I enjoyed it more the second time around. And I was like, okay, this vibe, this holy crap, I'm at the gates of hell and I need to claw my way out, paired with the artwork the occult imagery that I was really inspired by. I was like, I have to make this happen. And I just kind of sat on the idea for a little bit. And I'm not quite sure at what point the physical pledging came into it, but I went away just over a year ago now, would have been sort of April time. Me and my now wife went away on our honeymoon, and we went to Iceland. And we went to Iceland for 10 days, and we hiked on glaciers. And Iceland is incredibly beautiful and incredibly bleak at the same time. And at the time we were there, they were on 22 hours of daylight a day. And I'm not the greatest sleeper because I have a hyperactive creative mind. And whilst the curtains were blackout, I wasn't really working for me. My wife can sleep through a war, so she was gone. So I actually wrote the whole of Rectify, start to finish, on my honeymoon.
Get out.
Reflective of the day of exploring these shifting glaciers. I wrote the whole thing in the early hours of the morning on my iPhone, on the notes on my iPhone, start to finish, and over the course of about 10 days. And then I came home and I edited the horrendous typos and spelling mistakes through the what we'll call a manuscript, and I just read it all back and I was like, man, this is really good. This is really good. And then I sent it out to some people to playtest it before, and I was like, I just need feedback. Is this just really out there? And when people came back to me and they were like, what have you made?
Isn't that something?
I had some really trusted friends, people that I work with in the industry, some fantastic writers themselves. And I gave it to the people beyond my normal playtest group. And they came back to me and were like, Shep, I don't actually know how I really feel about this game. Some of it makes me feel uncomfortable. And they're like, is it inappropriately uncomfortable? If this was commercially available, are people going to complain about what I've made? And they're like, no, I don't know if I can finish the last part of the game. I've done the first 4 trials and I can't do the last one. And I'm like, okay. I think that's positive from what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah.
It could be disastrous, but I think that's positive. And I'm like, okay, this has to look right now. So I actually got in touch with the Albinus Design on Instagram, the guy whose artwork had inspired me. And I'm like, I need 6 exceptionally detailed images. 1 is a cover and 5 represent the 5 trials of hell I'm going to put people through. And I need them hand drawn, ink on paper in immense detail in your style. Can you do it? And he was like, yeah, give me the text. I need to be inspired by what you've made. And he read Rectify, and then he was like, I'm in. Let's do it.
How cool is that?
He made the cover image for us, and then the artwork that represent the trials, which is the mouth, the throat, the gut, the river of blood, and the pit, which is basically the anus of hell, and the artwork is phenomenal, like spine-tinglingly phenomenal, and yeah, and I was like, okay, this has just got to be, the graphic design. I know you've had eyes on it, and at this point, people listening to this may well have done as well through the campaign. You've got this whole black and white flip. Every page, like, it splits in the middle and goes from white text on black to black on white, and it's very, like, everything was done. All the graphic design I did to just try and reflect the mood and the what's happening, like the whole concept. And it's a little game at the end of the day. It's not a big hardback book. It's an A5 format soft book. It's 36 pages, and it comes with a small journal for you to record, thematically designed journal for you to write in. But the content and the things that happen from those 36 pages are like, I'm bigging it up, right? It's my game, but I feel like it's an experience that a lot of people that have played solo roleplay games, and there's some phenomenal games out there, Artifact, Nick's Colossal, that's done really well on Kickstarter. There's some stunning games out there to immerse yourself in, and I hope that people that have played those games will pick this up and feel like this is something very new for them.
Was it a solo game from the very beginning when you were writing in your honeymoon?
Absolutely, yeah. It was always a solo game, and I think that's because I'd recently played through Colossal, and I really loved what Nick had created in that game. Like, that's a really cleverly done world. I'm a big fan of that kind of small A5 format, half US letter format. Stuff, you've got like Morkborg, and there's a lot of other games out there that you've got Kids on Bikes, and there's a lot of games in that small format that I really like that format for the roleplay game industry. Like, I know it takes a lot for games in that format to be huge commercial hits, but from an indie standpoint, it's something I really love about that almost zine-sized release. And so I felt that I had to just stick to my guns and do that, because that would do it the most, like, it would suit it the most. Also, like, it would make the art cheaper because they'll be smaller pieces. Because, as anyone that works in the industry will know, artwork is not cheap, and good artwork is definitely not cheap.
Yeah, and nor should it be, right? I mean, that's
absolutely,
they deserve every penny of that. Whenever I talk to somebody, Shep, that is so we're talking before the Kickstarter launches. This is being released for those of you listening right after release. The Kickstarter's live. Scroll down, the whole routine. What I always find interesting, and I get a different answer almost every time. Where is the game? Is it done? And now we're doing the Kickstarter? Or are we going to work on it during the Kickstarter? Or are we going to close the Kickstarter and there's a lot of work to be done? Give me a sense of how baked this is.
It's done. 100%. It's print ready. The game is done. The artwork is done. The layout is done. The graphic design is done. The proofreading is done. The file prep is done.
Wow.
The only thing... So basically, I make it explicitly clear on the Kickstarter, and anybody that's listening to this at this point will have likely seen the Kickstarter or be about to jump onto it. I make it very clear on there that this game is not a game that will be enhanced by me jamming more content in the book, or releasing play aids, or giving you a nice branded coaster to put your coffee cup on. It's just, I don't do that kind of stuff. The game is available as the game with the journal, and you can purchase extra journals if you want to keep them for recording more. You can just use a piece of paper for all I care.
Right.
Like that, the experience is playing. The recording is a bonus. The game is done, and the Kickstarter is going to raise funds to manufacture it, print it, get it out into distribution, hopefully. And the the only stretch goals that I will be running will be some physical upgrades to the print quality. That being, I'm starting at a phenomenal print quality, and I am prepared to push up paperweights, cover weights, maybe a nice finish on the cover, but nothing that involves touching the content of this book.
That's huge.
That's actually something that I'm really passionate about. Like, it's a hard thing for me to be able to follow through on with my work with other publishers, but for myself, we've run 2 campaigns for the Gaia complex, two different books that have come out. Both times those books were entirely written and artwork was over 75% complete before I went to Kickstarter. The only writing I did was for when I unlocked additional pages of content on stuff, and I'd already storyboarded what that would be.
That's cool.
I just decided, if you unlock the stretch goals, I'll write it and put it in this book, and if you won't, it will go in the next book. It's going to get written eventually anyway. So, we fulfilled both campaigns. The first campaign actually fulfilled a month late because COVID happened. And
we'll give you a pass.
The source book was scheduled for fulfillment in February just gone, and we fulfilled in December before Christmas.
Unbelievable.
So, like, in the current marketplace, to be delivering on time or early, but that's because I just hold off on going to Kickstarter until I'm like, I don't want to. Running a Kickstarter is a huge investment of time, even if it's a little tiny Kickstarter, like in Zine Quest. I ran my Kickstarter for Kendo Koala and Friends, a really silly, tiny little game, 16-pager that I made. We got like 50 backers, and we just did a tiny little campaign.
Yeah. Still,
you have to be dedicated. Every single person is important, and I don't want to be thinking I need to write and work. Like, I need to be in Kickstarter mode, not creator mode during the course of a campaign. And afterwards, when it's your own stuff and you're a one-man band and you've got, the print file prep, and then you've got the manufacturing, and you've got to sort out fulfillment and the incoming goods to the country. And then, I think you need a few months to focus on the business side of a Kickstarter. And I think a lot of creators pass that up, and they run into difficulty because they are wanting to get back to the creative process, and they take their eye off the ball a little bit.
It's a story we've heard before, more times than I wish. And it tends to be more naivete, not bad intentions, right? It's just not understanding it. So last but not least, Shep, one of the things that I do at the very end of all my interviews is I put an end cap on it. We've gotten your origin story. We've learned so much in the process, up to and including the newest things that you've created. The end cap I want to put on here is you make. Other people are consuming, right? I want to know what you consume. So we've touched on it a little bit, but I want to know, is there anything recently that's gotten its hooks into you the way the stuff you've made has gotten its hooks into other people? So is there anything recently that has taken over your life? It could be a video game, a board game, a book, a movie, something that you couldn't shake, you couldn't get out of your head.
Yeah, interesting question. So I've seen quite a lot of good TV recently.
Let's talk about it.
I've literally just started watching. I'm very late to the game. I know everyone else starting. I've just started watching The Last of Us.
Oh, yeah.
And we're a couple of episodes in, and I know this is a big hit for me. So
episode 3, have you watched it yet?
That's tonight. Episodes we've watched the first 2, yeah. So please don't just.
No, I'm not gonna say a goddamn word. Just send me an email when you're done. That's all I'm gonna ask.
Yeah. We'll speak tomorrow. So that's definitely gonna be a big hit. I mean, it's gonna be hard not to shout about The Mandalorian, right? Because I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I always have been since I was a child. It's a big influence to me in a lot of ways, and what John Favreau and Dave Filoni and the crew have done with The Mandalorian and the recent TV offshoots of Star Wars stories are just frankly fantastic. Not that the movies themselves are fantastic, but what they've done is next level, and that has inspired me a lot. I mean, since watching the last season of The Mandalorian, my regular games night, I've been running a West End Games Star Wars RPG Second Edition Star Wars campaign.
That brings back memories.
Usual dark twist. So we've been playing Star Wars, and actually in the last few weeks, me and my in-house gaming buddies, that are my boys, have been playing huge amounts of Star Wars X-Wing 2.0.
Oh, nice.
Like, we got it back out and we've struggled to stop playing. We were like, literally after school, they come home after school. We must play X-Wing 2 games a night minimum.
Wow.
Like every day. We have this little I'm going to show you. We got a little Mandalorian keyring here. This is
amazing.
our trophy. And whoever wins the most recent game takes this. And my oldest son, Oscar, is on a 6-game win streak. And we have a little, like, once you win a game, you can't change your fleet list until somebody beats it.
Ooh.
So he's on 6 games straight with the same list. And it's really competitive. And we play it but for something to make you want to get a board game out or a war game out or something, we have a lot of games.
Yeah.
You get something out and you're like, what do you want to do tonight? Do you want to watch a movie? Do you want to, no, we want to beat Oscar at X-Wing. Like, that's all we care about now.
God, that's fun.
That's really, really huge. So yeah, like The Mandalorian has done big things for me. And also, it's very clear to me I'm a big fan of the cyberpunk genre and the dark dystopian side of things. Whilst it's been some months since I watched it, my brain keeps going back to The Peripheral. It was on Amazon. It's based on the William Gibson novel, which I'm a big fan of William Gibson's work.
My God, I don't know nothing about this.
I mean, I think it's a phenomenal piece of work that they created. It does a good job of representing the technology and the concepts of the novel. It, like most television series, it does take its liberties on changing content.
It's a different medium.
I believe that series took sort of storytelling of that genre to a next level. Like, I was a huge fan of Altered Carbon when that came out. The first season in particular, the second season didn't really make me tick so much.
Same.
And whilst Altered Carbon is a lot more action-packed than something like The Peripheral, which is much more about the characters and the story, like, it'd been a long time since I'd seen something with a cyberpunk flavor that got me excited, and I literally couldn't wait for the next episode. And I think they did a phenomenal job with The Peripheral, like a really phenomenal job. I would recommend it to anybody. So that inspired me to open the laptop and write into the early hours of the morning again with the Gaia Complex content. So anything that does that is a really big hit. Is a really big hit for me. So I would say,
that's great.
And this week has been a bit silly because there's so much new cool stuff has come out. Because obviously, I've just finally got round to being able to watch The Last of Us, and then the Witcher started yesterday on Netflix. And I'm like, God damn it, I can't. Not enough time. So I'm like wondering if I can send the kids away somewhere for a few days so I can just binge watch some TV. So yeah, they TV and X-Wing is what's inspiring me at the moment.
So 2 things real quick, based off from the Star Wars aspects. You mentioned The Mandalorian. Did you watch Andor?
Oh, of course. Okay. I've seen, watched, read, played. If it's got Star Wars written on it, I probably have digested it. Andor was phenomenal.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Like, that's a whole new spin on the world that we know. Like, what does it look like to be a civilian? What does it look like to be one of the office workers in the Galactic Republic, the Empire? And you're like, this is new, and it's gritty, and it's dark, and it's a new level, like a different, mature way of telling those stories. Like, absolutely fantastic. And you get a really, really, really good look at the quad jumper, which is one of my favorite ships in the whole of Star Wars, and one I'm very keen of flying in X-Wing. So I was really excited as well. So.
All right, and then from a sci-fi aspect, The Expanse.
Yeah, weirdly, everything about The Expanse should be something that I utterly love.
Yeah.
But I really struggled getting through the first season, and I never started season 2. Now, a few people have said to me,
Push through.
Man, it's a slow burn. You
Yes.
get like, it's just like Breaking Bad was. You think,
Yep.
am I going to like this? But eventually you're hooked. And so The Expanse is on my
Good.
list of next time my family go away for a weekend,
Yeah.
I am going to binge watch the crap out of it, to the point that I currently have an Expanse screensaver on my MacBook to remind me that I have to revisit it. People ask me this a lot, like, what do you think of Expanse? And I'm always like, well, I don't know. I thought it was okay. Other things I've watched were okay, and they might have got better. I gave up too early.
It took me three tries to get through season 1.
Okay.
And then all the advice you've been given is correct. I think it's one of the greatest TV shows ever made. And I struggled at the beginning, just like you did. Here's the thing that I'm going to put in there to hopefully push you to get through it is so hard to stick the landing on a show. So hard to get the last season right, and so hard to get the last episode right. And they killed it. The last season is phenomenal. The last episode, it was over. I didn't want to watch it because I didn't want the show to be over. And it went to the end credits. And I remember sitting there going, I'm completely satisfied. This didn't do what I thought it was going to do, but all of it made sense. I am happy. They never have to do anything else. And like, that's not easy to do, man. As a creator and a writer, you know that.
I can't think of many TV shows where I felt that especially after a multi-series run.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think maybe if somebody said to me now, what's the best series end you can think of? Maybe Justified.
Nice. I don't disagree with that. That's a good call. So that'll be one more reason for you to go to explore it. Shep, there's a lot of really fun things to do on a Saturday night, which includes playing X-Wing with your kids. But you wasted 2 hours talking to me, and I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for asking me to come on and talk about my past and my games and talk about Rectify. It means a lot. I am really humbled and honored for you to have taken that interest in me. I thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And at some point, I'm gonna trick you into coming back on again.
It'll be a pleasure.
All right. Hey, for those of you listening, you know the rules. Scroll down, click all the links. They're all there waiting for you. Everything that we've talked about. But more importantly, you sat through the whole thing. This is the end. And I appreciate you too. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Tabletop Talk and share it with your friends. Check out our content on YouTube and Twitch. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and stay updated on everything coming from Third Floor. All the links are in the show notes. Take care, floorheads.
Oh, hey, are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care. Bye.